I'm sorry, but we don't serve people like you here." That sentence didn't just stop the conversation. It slammed the air out of the entire room. Silver Oak Lounge, one of Manhattan's most exclusive fine dining spots, went dead silent. Forks froze mid-air. Champagne glasses wobbled in stunned hands. At table 6, a man stood motionless. Mid-40s, sharp charcoal suit, kind eyes. His hands moved with practiced grace, forming signs most people in the room didn't understand or didn't want to. And standing beside him was a young waitress, dark brown skin glowing under the soft chandeliers, curves balanced by quiet poise, her name tag crooked from hours of rushing. Janelle Brooks, 25. Black, calm. And right now, burning with quiet disbelief. This wasn't just about miscommunication. It wasn't even about bad customer service. What had just happened, loud enough for half the dining room to hear, was flat-out discrimination. And not just toward a deaf guest, toward a woman who dared to help him. Janelle hadn't planned to be a hero today. She was just trying to survive another 10-hour shift on aching feet, dodging entitled guests and sharp-tongued coworkers. But the moment that man walked in and started signing for help, something inside her lit up, something rooted in childhood afternoons helping her deaf neighbor order groceries, something called empathy. So when the manager mocked the guest, then sneered at her for playing translator, Janelle did the unthinkable. She responded. Not with words, not with yelling, but with fluid, confident hands answering the man in sign language so elegant it silenced even the snickering staff at the bar. That moment, it didn't go unnoticed, because at the far end of the room, a woman in a dark green power suit, the CEO herself, had been watching everything from behind a wine rack. And what she did next would leave everyone reeling. This is not just a story about service or sign language. This is a black story about courage, dignity, and the brutal cost of doing the right thing in a world that rewards silence. So if you believe quiet kindness can still shake the world, stay tuned, because what's coming will change more than just one life. It'll change everything. Before that night at Silver Oak Lounge, Janelle Brooks was just another name on the schedule. No title, no spotlight, no special treatment. Just a quiet girl with quick hands, soft eyes, and a heart trained to observe more than it ever demanded. She worked double shifts, memorized regulars' drink orders, and kept her smile steady even when her back was screaming and her tips didn't match the effort. Born and raised in Queens, New York, Janelle was the daughter of a public school teacher and an emergency room nurse. Her parents didn't have much, but what they lacked in money, they made up for in discipline and compassion. Every Sunday after church, her mom would say, "Baby girl, the world will judge you before you open your mouth, so when you do speak, make it count." Janelle listened. But more importantly, she learned to listen to others, especially those whose voices were often ignored. When she was 10, the woman next door had a grandson named Caleb. He was deaf. Most of the neighborhood kids avoided him. But Janelle? She sat on the porch beside him every afternoon, watching his hands move like dancing birds. She didn't understand much at first, but she watched. Then she learned. She spent the next year teaching herself American Sign Language from library books and grainy YouTube videos, not because anyone asked her to, but because, to her, no one should ever feel invisible. That decision, one no one paid attention to back then, would become the reason everything changed. Now 25, Janelle was juggling night shifts and online classes in special education. She wanted to work with kids like Caleb, kids who just needed someone to meet them halfway. The Silver Oak job? It paid the bills, barely. But more than that, it was survival. In a world that often labeled her by her skin, her hair, her zip code, she was determined to rewrite the script. Janelle never craved attention. She didn't dress to be noticed. She didn't speak louder to be heard. But the truth was, when she entered a room, something shifted. People felt it. Maybe it was her poise. Maybe it was the way she made you feel like you mattered. She was the kind of person the world often underestimated. Until one night, someone made the mistake of doing it in public. And that mistake would change everything. He walked in alone. No reservation, no entourage, no flashy entrance. Just a man in a tailored gray suit, with kind eyes and a quiet presence that somehow filled the room more than anyone else's laughter or conversation ever could. His hair was peppered with silver, his posture perfect, and his steps deliberate, like someone used to being watched, but tired of being misunderstood. The maitre d' glanced up, immediately unsure how to handle him. The man looked around, clearly trying to communicate, but instead of speaking, he raised his hands and began signing, smooth, precise, intentional, American Sign Language. And just like that, you could feel the air shift. A few guests at nearby tables exchanged looks. One waiter smirked, whispered something to another. Another rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, "Great." Another, "Special case." It wasn't the first time it had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. The man kept signing, patient but clearly frustrated. No one responded, no one even tried. The hostess at the front desk stared, eyes darting like she was hoping someone else would step in. But no one moved. Except to judge. His name, though no one in the room knew it yet, was Evan Tate. He was 44 years old, a tech entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and a passionate advocate for accessibility in public spaces. To most people, he was just another man in a nice suit, but to those who knew, he was a key player in reshaping how corporate America thinks about inclusion. He hadn't come here for attention. He hadn't even come for business. Truthfully, he just wanted a quiet dinner after a long day of meetings. But the moment he opened the front door, he knew the vibe was off. Eyes followed him like he was a disruption instead of a guest. He was used to this. Deaf people always are. Being too much for some places, not enough for others. Still, he stood there, hands moving with grace and dignity, signing the simplest of greetings. "Hello. Table for one. Please." He didn't expect applause. He never did. But he also didn't expect what came next, the subtle mockery, the snickers, the hostess pretending she couldn't see him. He'd been in boardrooms worth billions. He'd sat on panels about equity and leadership. But this was the kind of everyday moment that always stung the most. Because no matter how far he'd come, some people still looked at him and saw only the silence. Until her hands started to move. And that changed everything. Janelle had just delivered a tray of cocktails to table 9 when she noticed the tension near the host stand. Her eyes naturally scanned the room not out of nosiness, but because after years in food service, you learn to feel a shift before anyone says a word. She spotted the man right away. The way he stood calmly, hands moving with quiet precision. The way no one responded. The awkward shuffle of the hostess, the sideways glance from the maitre d', the way 2 nearby servers were laughing, not loud, but loud enough. Janelle's chest tightened. She didn't know the man, but she recognized the look on his face, the same one her neighbor Caleb used to wear when the teacher handed out instructions without looking his way. A mix of patience and disappointment. A look that said, "I've been here before." She paused. This wasn't her table. This wasn't her job. It wasn't her business. But that had never stopped her before, not when it came to doing what was right. Without checking with a manager, without asking for permission, Janelle walked toward the front. She slipped past the bar, around the wine display, and gently approached the man from the side so he could see her clearly. Then, with steady hands and a soft smile, she signed, "Hello, sir. May I help you?" The man's entire face shifted. His eyes lit up, posture relaxing as if someone had finally opened a door that had been slammed shut too many times before. He signed back, relieved. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone here would understand me." Their hands began to move fast at first, then more fluidly, like 2 musicians who had finally found someone playing the same song. The entire room watched in stunned silence. And not far away, the manager stepped forward, clearly irritated. "Janelle," he hissed under his breath. "You're a server, not a translator. Stay in your lane." Janelle turned to him, eyes calm but firm. "I'm just helping a guest," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper, but strong enough to be heard. Her hands didn't tremble, her voice didn't crack. Because this time, she wasn't backing down. She returned to signing, fully present, fully composed. And what none of them knew, not the staff, not the manager, not even the guest, was that someone else had been watching from behind the wine rack. And that person was about to change everything. The moment the manager walked away, Janelle turned back to the man Evan and gave him a reassuring nod. She didn't need a title or a uniform to know what he needed. just someone to meet him where he was. They moved to a small table near the window, one often saved for VIPs. No one dared to stop her. Janelle knelt beside him, her apron slightly wrinkled, hair pulled into a neat low bun. Her hands moved gently, smoothly, as she asked if he preferred something from the chef's tasting menu or if he wanted a quiet corner away from the stairs. Evan smiled. Then he signed slowly. "Thank you. I haven't had a real conversation in public like this in months." Janelle blinked. Months? In a city like New York? He continued, explaining that most people either avoid him or treat him like a burden. They wave their hands frantically, talk louder, as if volume could substitute for empathy. But Janelle's communication was different, intentional, present. She told him how she'd learned ASL as a kid, because her neighbor had a grandson who was deaf and no one else would talk to him. She had never forgotten what it felt like to see someone light up just because they were finally being understood. For the next 15 minutes, the two of them shared more than just signs. They shared space, respect, humanity. They talked about accessibility in restaurants, about how most companies talk big about inclusion but rarely practice it. Janelle mentioned how she was studying special education. Evan's eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed. "You don't just interpret words," he signed. "You interpret intention." Janelle didn't know what to say, so she smiled, a little shy, a little proud. And that's when Evan leaned forward, his expression serious now. "I wasn't here by accident." She looked at him, confused. "I've been vetting restaurants for a new nationwide partnership on inclusive hospitality. Tonight was a test." Janelle's hand stopped. "A test? And you," he added, "just became the reason this place might make the list or not." What she didn't know was that someone else had already made their decision, a decision that had nothing to do with inclusion policy and everything to do with Janelle. Because the CEO had seen enough, and she was ready to act. It happened fast, too fast. Janelle had just stood up from Evan's table, ready to walk his request to the kitchen, when she heard her name sharp and cold slice through the air. "Janelle. A word. Now." It was Marcus, the assistant general manager. His voice wasn't loud, but the venom in it turned heads at nearby tables. She hesitated. Evan looked up at her, concerned. She nodded, signaling she'd be right back. But she wouldn't be. Because the moment she stepped toward Marcus, the humiliation began. In full view of guests. Of co-workers. Of Evan. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, arms crossed, mouth curled in disgust. "You're a waitress. You're not paid to perform. This isn't a stage, and that man doesn't need a savior." Janelle blinked, stunned. She opened her mouth to respond, but he kept going, louder this time. "You made a scene. You embarrassed this restaurant. And don't give me that diversity nonsense. You were showboating, trying to get attention." A couple at a nearby table glanced over, whispering. A busboy froze mid-step, unsure whether to move or listen. The hostess turned pale behind the reservation stand. Janelle's hands clenched at her sides. She'd faced discrimination before, in school, on the street, even from customers. But this was different. This was someone in power, tearing her down not behind closed doors, but in front of strangers, as if her dignity was a disposable thing. Evan had stood up now, watching from his table. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read everything. The way Marcus gestured, the way his mouth tightened, the heat radiating from his body language, it was all too familiar. Janelle took a breath. "I was helping a guest. He needed someone to talk to. So I did, respectfully, quietly." "You stepped out of line," Marcus snapped. "Don't turn this into some black girl pity show. You're not special. You're replaceable." Those words hit harder than any slap. Guests turned fully now, some shocked, others silent. A few pretended not to hear. But one person had heard enough. And she stepped forward. Dark green power suit, confident walk, eyes like steel behind designer glasses. Miranda Stone, CEO of the Silver Oak Hospitality Group. Her voice? Calm, low, lethal. "Actually, she's not replaceable." The silence that followed? Deafening. "Actually, she's not replaceable." The voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because when Veronica Street James spoke, people listened. She wasn't what you'd expect from a hospitality tycoon. She wasn't loud, flashy, or interested in theatrics. She built her empire on precision, empathy, and never missing a single detail. That night, she had arrived unannounced, no press, no warning to quietly observe her latest investment. Silver Oak Lounge was the crown jewel of the chain, and she wanted to see it at its rawest. What she witnessed instead was the exact rot she'd spent her career eliminating. Now, every eye in the restaurant turned toward her. Marcus stiffened, his face draining of color. "Miss Street James," he stammered, suddenly polite. "I didn't see you there." "I know," she replied coolly. "I watched everything. From the moment this gentleman entered, to the moment you tried to tear down a woman doing the right thing." Janelle stood frozen. She didn't even know Veronica was in the building. Evan, meanwhile, was watching closely every sign, every expression. He could tell this woman held power, but more importantly, he could tell she understood why it mattered. "Marcus," Veronica said, turning her full attention to him. "You embarrassed my brand tonight, not her. You made a guest feel invisible. You mocked an employee for showing initiative, and worst of all, you did it under the assumption that no one important was watching." Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, but she raised one hand. "Save it. Your position is terminated, effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the room. Marcus sputtered, red-faced. "You can't." "I just did," she cut in. "Security will escort you out." Two uniformed staff members appeared like shadows, and Marcus had no choice but to walk. His pride was in tatters, his authority stripped away. Veronica turned to Janelle next. "You didn't just do your job," she said gently. "You reminded this room what service is supposed to mean." Janelle blinked, stunned. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Veronica said. "You reminded me why I built this company in the first place." She looked over to Evan and signed, slowly but clearly. "Thank you for your patience. We failed you at first. But I promise, it ends tonight." Evan nodded, visibly moved. Veronica turned back to Janelle, her tone softening. "Let's talk tomorrow morning, about your future." Janelle had no idea what that meant, but something in the way Veronica smiled told her everything was about to change. The next morning, Janelle arrived at the Silver Oak corporate office in Midtown Manhattan, unsure of what to expect. She wore her best blouse, the one she usually saved for job interviews. Her hands were still a little shaky, and she hadn't slept much. The memory of last night, the humiliation, the confrontation, the CEO's sudden defense played on loop in her head. She was escorted to the top floor, into a quiet office with floor-to-ceiling windows and no distractions. Just light, air, and the woman who had changed everything with one sentence. Veronica Street James stood by the window, holding a black coffee, her posture straight but not rigid. When she turned, her eyes softened. "You showed up," she said simply. "That tells me a lot." Janelle nodded. "I didn't know what this meeting was about." "It's about why I saw myself in you," Veronica replied. Janelle tilted her head, surprised. "You saw yourself in me?" Veronica walked to her desk and sat, motioning for Janelle to join her. "I grew up in Baton Rouge," she began. "Single mother, waitress through high school. Everyone thought I'd burn out by 25. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told a different story, the kind of story people don't put on business cards. "My sister was born deaf," she continued. "Her name was Lacey, the smartest, funniest person I've ever known." Janelle leaned in, listening closely. But the world wasn't built for girls like her. Not then. Teachers ignored her. Employers dismissed her. Men talked over her. I watched her shrink into silence, not because she couldn't speak, but because no one ever tried to understand her. Veronica paused. "She died young, a car accident, nothing dramatic, just one of those moments life steals from you without warning." Janelle's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." Veronica looked away for a beat, then back. "After she passed, I promised myself two things. First, I'd build a company where no one felt unseen. Second, I'd never stand by and let someone get erased again." Her gaze locked on Janelle. "Last night, I saw you refuse to let a man be erased. And when they came for you, you didn't flinch. That takes courage. Most people in corner offices don't even pretend to have. Janelle was speechless. She had no idea her small act of kindness had touched something so deep. But Veronica wasn't done. I'm offering you more than a promotion, she said. I'm offering you a seat at the table, because I believe people like you are the future of this industry. And just like that, Janelle's life began to pivot towards something she'd never dared to dream. By Wednesday morning, the story had already gone viral. Someone had recorded the confrontation at the restaurant. Marcus's outburst, Janelle's calm response, Veronica's powerful entrance. The video had made its way from TikTok to Twitter to every major news outlet within 48 hours. The headlines were sharp. CEO shuts down racist manager in viral restaurant clash. Black waitress uses sign language to help deaf guest CEO fires manager on the spot. Kindness isn't weakness, how one woman changed a company. Veronica had hoped to handle everything quietly, but once the story exploded online, silence was no longer an option. So she called a company-wide meeting. All 3,000 employees from janitors to regional directors tuned in from different time zones. The live stream broadcasted from Silver Oak's main headquarters. Janelle sat just out of frame, heart pounding, watching as her life became the center of a national conversation. Veronica stood on a minimalist stage with nothing behind her but the company's logo and a bold new slogan. People first, always. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and unapologetic. I want to speak directly to every employee, every partner, every guest who has ever felt overlooked or unheard in one of our spaces, she began. What happened at the Silver Oak Lounge last weekend was not a one-time incident. It was a mirror. And if that reflection makes us uncomfortable, good. That means we're finally seeing the cracks. She went on to explain that the company would launch a full internal audit on inclusion practices not just for show, but for systemic change. Bias training would be restructured. Hiring practices would be revised. A new leadership development track would be opened for underrepresented employees. And then came the moment no one expected. I'd like to introduce our new Director of Inclusive Guest Experience, Janelle Thomas. The room behind the cameras erupted into applause. Chat messages lit up the screen with congratulations. Heart emojis, clapping hands. Janelle's name trended nationally within the hour. Janelle stepped forward slowly, still stunned. She didn't speak long, just a few words. I used to think kindness had to be quiet, that it belonged in the background. But now I know better. Kindness doesn't whisper, it leads. The moment was electric, unrehearsed, honest. And in that moment, Janelle wasn't just the face of a viral story. She became the symbol of a movement. The applause hadn't even faded before the backlash began. Within 24 hours of the company-wide announcement, social media shifted. At first, it was trolls' faceless accounts accusing Janelle of being a diversity hire, claiming she'd staged the entire incident for clout. Then came the anonymous Reddit threads, claims that she had faked knowing sign language, that Evan was an actor, that Veronica had orchestrated the whole thing as a publicity stunt to cover up internal scandals. Hashtags twisted the narrative into something unrecognizable. Number sign scam. Number woke marketing. Number false ally. Janelle logged off for the first day, then the second. But by day 3, the whispers turned dangerous. A former employee, one Janelle barely remembered, came forward, saying she'd been aggressive in the past. Someone from high school claimed she was manipulative. Even her photos were pulled into threads, where strangers dissected her smile, her posture, her clothes. And that's when the email came. An anonymous tip sent to every major media outlet, accusing Janelle of falsifying her resume, inflating her qualifications, and fabricating her connection to the deaf community. It wasn't true, but it was loud. For the first time since that life-changing night, Janelle felt doubt creep in. Veronica called her into the office. Janelle sat down, shoulders heavy. "Should I step down?" she asked. "This is getting out of control." Veronica didn't hesitate. "No, you hold steady. But they're saying I lied. They're saying I'm using people." Veronica leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. "Let me ask you something. Did you help Evan because you thought anyone would see it? No, Janelle said without pause. Did you know I was watching? No. Did you do it because you expected a promotion? Of course not. Then the rest is just noise. Veronica opened her drawer and pulled out a small, simple folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from deaf guests, from Black hospitality workers, from mothers of disabled children, all thanking Janelle. You didn't just change a room, Veronica said. You changed how people see themselves. And just like that, the noise didn't seem so loud. The attacks didn't stop, but they didn't win either. Because the truth, as Janelle was learning, doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand tall. And that, she could do. The grand opening of the Silver Oak Inclusion Initiative wasn't just another ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was a declaration loud, visible, and impossible to ignore. Held in the newly renovated wing of the company's flagship location in Brooklyn, the space was designed from the ground up to prioritize accessibility. Every detail had been reimagined, from visual menus and tactile surfaces to real-time sign language interpretation and sensory-friendly lighting. And standing at the center of it all, under soft white lights and in front of a sea of cameras, was Janelle Thomas. She wore a deep emerald blazer, crisp and confident. But it wasn't the outfit that made her shine, it was the way she carried herself. Head high, eyes steady, hands calm. Veronica stood beside her, beaming with the quiet pride of a mentor watching her students surpass even the highest expectations. The room buzzed with executives, journalists, disability advocates, and community leaders. But the front row was reserved for someone else, Evan, seated beside his mother, who had flown in from Oregon for the occasion. Janelle caught his eye. He gave a small nod, the kind that meant more than words ever could. When Janelle stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent. There was a time, she began, when I thought kindness meant staying small, staying quiet, not rocking the boat. She paused, letting the memory of that first night return. But I've learned that kindness can also be fierce. That standing up, even when your voice shakes, or when your hands sign instead of speak, is one of the bravest things a person can do. She scanned the room. Accessibility is not charity. It's not a special feature. It's a right, a standard. And starting today, it's the standard here. The audience erupted in applause. Evan signed "Thank you" from the front row, his mother wiping a tear from her cheek. Veronica took the stage and joined her, placing a hand on Janelle's shoulder. Let this be the beginning, she said, of doing business, humanely. Together, they cut the ribbon. Camera shutters snapped, reporters scribbled notes. But for Janelle, the real moment wasn't about headlines. It was the father in the back of the room, holding his deaf daughter's hand as she smiled wide, understanding every word. It was the whisper in her own mind saying, "You did this." And it was knowing, finally, that she had not just found her place. She had made one. Months passed, and the story of Janelle Thomas became more than a moment. It became a message. College students wrote papers about her courage. HR departments used her story in training sessions. Disability advocacy groups referenced the Silver Oak Initiative as a model for true corporate inclusion. But for Janelle, none of that mattered as much as the changes she saw in real life. She saw it in the restaurant hostess, who now greeted deaf guests with simple signs. She saw it in the teenage girl who emailed her from Detroit, saying, "I thought no one like me could ever lead. But then I saw you." She saw it in the way Evan texted her once a week, sometimes with silly memes, sometimes just a single emoji, the hand sign for "thank you." And most importantly, she saw it in herself. Because the real victory wasn't the promotion, or the praise, or the spotlight. It was the fact that Janelle no longer second-guessed her worth, no longer questioned whether kindness belonged in boardrooms, no longer wondered if empathy was weakness. She knew now. Kindness is a form of leadership. Quiet, yes, but powerful, unshakable. And it always, always comes full circle. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're just a barista, or an intern, or someone who's been made to feel small. Let this story remind you. You do not need a title to make a difference. You do not need permission to show compassion. And you do not need a stage to lead. You only need a moment and the courage to meet it. Because sometimes, the smallest act of humanity in the right moment can rewrite an entire system. So the next time you see someone being dismissed, ignored, or silenced, be the one who steps forward. Be the one who signs, who speaks, who stands. That's how change begins. Not with power, not with perfection, but with one person who chooses to lead with their heart. And hey, if this story touched you, maybe it's not just a story. Maybe it's a mirror. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is a force, that their voice matters, that their presence matters. Because the world doesn't just need louder voices. It needs braver hearts. And you, my friend, you might just be next.